Hi everybody, welcome to the Live Sound Podcast. This is episode 4, and if you've seen any of the others and you're coming back, then thank you very much. If this is the first time, then thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm going to keep this nice and short because this is one of my favourite ones that we've done. Our guest this week is John Delf. He's front of house engineer, and his CV goes from 5 Seconds of Summer to Louis Tomlinson, James Arthur, Plan B, Lily Allen, and everywhere in between. John also owns the Edge recording studio. We have an interesting conversation about the pros and cons between live and studio and combining the two, also going into and touching on broadcast mixes, and also his move back to analog from digital. It's a really interesting one, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Cheers. Hi everybody, welcome to the Live Sound Podcast, and today I have with me John Delf. How are you, my friend?
I'm not too bad, holding up.
Holding up. Yeah, not too bad. I think the same, and I think everybody else is probably in the same boat as us, to be honest, but getting along. So we'll jump straight into it. If you want to give us a quick kind of rundown of your client list, who you've been out with, and what you've been doing recently.
Well, I'm currently front of house for Louis Tomlinson. Just before that, I did a couple of years with James Arthur, and I was with 5 Seconds of Summer, The Script, Lily Allen, Plan B, lots of different bands. And last year I did a few one-offs and a few little tours with different bands as well, like Wet 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 and BB Rexha and different people, just covering for people as well. So, but that, been doing it for 25 years touring. So. Quite a lot of people over the years. So.
Yeah, hell of a CV. So, how did you the standard first question? Then, how did you get into all this?
Well, I did a degree in architecture, and I hated every minute of it. And so I had this thought that if I can get a degree in something that I hate, I've got to be able to succeed in something that I love, which was music. And I went around all the studios asking for a job, and they all said no. And then one of them had a course running, so I did 3 months on the course, went around all the studios again, asked for a job. And one of them said, oh yeah, you can come and work for nothing for us. And I was cleaning toilets and putting in suspended ceilings in the live room and stuff, and just started in studios doing that, and just was a T-boy basically.
It's interesting. It seems quite a lot of people, again, most of the people we speak to is starting in that studio world. It seems like a much I'm not sure if it really is a clearer, easier path to get in, but it seems like the majority of people start their way and then end up falling into the live side of things.
Well, at the time, it was the only courses, the proper courses, were you had to be a grade 8 musician to get onto a sound engineering course back in my day, and so the only way this other course was a Spirit Studios course in Manchester, and then being self-taught was, I found that I learned a lot more in the studio than I would have done on any course that I'd done. And having my own studio now, we get a lot of work experience come in here, even with degrees and stuff. And it's like, they couldn't run a studio yet. They couldn't run a session yet. So It's sort of, you couldn't leave them the keys and go, there you go, you got a degree, brilliant, off you go. But within 6 months of being in here, then they probably could. It's that real world experience is more valuable, I think, than a degree level. Maybe that's just my old school attitude.
So. Yeah. So how did you move into the touring side from that then?
Well, there were bands that I would come in the studio and they say, "Oh, do you want to come and do our live shows with us?" And I was like, "No, not really." And eventually, one of them twisted my arm, and I did a couple of shows in Manchester, and then we did some shows in London, and then those shows became a tour, and then I got asked to do tour managing. So I did a bit of tour managing and sound for a long, long time, and then it just got to the point that I was so busy on the road that the studio stuff got left behind. After doing that for years and years and years, I decided I wanted my own studio. So I built one at home and then looked for a place to have my own one, and found that about 10 years ago. And that's where we are here as well. So, but my touring, I'm still doing like 9 months touring a year and coming here every now and again, but it runs while I'm away.
So how I've asked this in previous episodes, but again, it always interests me because my take on it is, again, there's a lot of people who say the age-old thing of studio guys can't mix a show and live guys can't mix a record, which I think's complete rubbish. I always found that studio gave you, a super in-depth knowledge of equipment and sound, and sculpting and what you were doing, and live made you do it fast. But for me, the two skills always kind of lent themselves to each other. What's your opinion on that?
Well, when I was first working in studios and we had the odd live guy come in to do a mix with stuff, we'd always be like, he doesn't know what he's doing. But I didn't know what I was doing either. So at the same time, so that was the arrogance of youth. Then I went out on the road and I really learned how a band sounded when they played together. Because in the studio, a lot of people, you know, the bands come in and it's like, oh, let's do the drums first, let's do the bass, and then let's do the guitars, and don't always get the bands to play together. And they never really hear the whole band as how that works as a single entity. And so doing live sound really teaches you that. And it also the speed of getting the sound together, like doing a festival and you've got no sound check and you've got 48 channels to mix and you've got to get it down straight. You know, this is like on analog desks. This is what, you know, this, when I'm talking about when I was learning that, it was really good for me, a really good discipline, and to hear that and to hear the whole mix and hear what's wrong with it straight away and have to be able to fix it in 1 or 2 songs. You still need to do that sort at a certain extent with digital because of, you know, say if you're going in a tent in a festival or something, and then coming back in the studio to bring that back into the studio was really interesting, because then you can then get into much more finer detail of all of those elements that you've learned. So I think both of them have fed off of each other really. And I don't think, I think studio engineers need to get out and watch a few more gigs or try and mix some gigs, and then they'll learn a bit more about a band. And then also some live engineers need to get in the studio so then they can get into the finer detail of the elements of those, of the mix. And you know, you can listen much more in isolation in a studio, whereas in live you sort of have to just guess, because most of the time you've got to listen to it as a whole or on headphones whilst the rest of the band are playing in the background. You know, it's difficult to fine tune those elements much.
So you can almost use that experience that you've made in the studio of how to kind of shape the jigsaw puzzle and apply that live when you've got, you know, potentially, as you say, a ton of other sound and distraction, things like that. You can still use that studio experience you've got to potentially home in and fine tune what you're doing when you're not in the best listening, you know, listening situation, and then be able to kind of create your mix and be able to create that space and everything in a much less ideal environment.
Yeah, I think elements of each teach you that. And also in a live situation, you're in a different venue every day and it sounds completely different every day, and trying to make it consistent means you have to change things. Whereas when you're in a studio, I imagine you get settled into a routine of, you know, you get to know your monitors inside out, and then you start doing things the same all the time, and it's not a challenge. So you're not really learning. I think you're limited to the amount you learn because you're in exactly the same environment every day. You know, whereas on a live sound, it's much harder.
Did you find that you used your studio before the days of virtual soundcheck? Obviously, that's something that's come in the last few years. I know certainly for me, I love nothing more than being able to track a show, however we did it, you know, whether it tapping at the direct outs of a house console or something like that, but getting back to the studio and then being able to actually question what you do. Because for me, it was always, you know, like you say, get to a festival, look at the console while the guy before you was on. Yeah, that EQ looks about right. That looks about right. My vocal looks about right. Do your line check, dial in your gains, dial in your thresholds, and go. And it was all about kind of, right, well, that sounds pretty good. And you'd look where you were at the end of the show, mark it up, take some pictures or whatever, or save your show file. And then that dictated your level, that then you were trying to consistently replicate that, but you didn't ever have time to question whether that was the right thing. So for me, I always loved going back to the studio and then spending the day trying different snare drum reverbs or different vocal effects or different things, and being able to improve my live show that way before I had the luxury of virtual soundcheck. I mean, I still do now, to be honest. It's still a preferable thing.
Yeah, it's great to be able to go back and check those things, because it's like, you sometimes settle into a routine. If you've been doing a band for a long time, you'd stick with what you've known, what's worked, and rather than try and experiment. So if you can take those multi-tracks away, I mean, I love virtual sound checking now. It's brilliant. I don't, if with a virtual sound check, you don't need a band even coming near the stage until the show time, once you've got underway with an act. And being able to experiment with that, like you say, change different reverbs and things. But if you come into a studio, then maybe you'll hear more on the backing tracks that you didn't hear before, or that somebody is doing something that you're missing, and you just go, oh, that's a really nice bit, I should stick that in, or make sure that gets heard, or maybe I'll speak to the guitarist and tell him to turn that bit up, because it's been missing. So yeah, I think the virtual sound check has been great for that. And but funnily enough, getting when I did an analogue tour a couple of years ago, and I thought, oh, I'm really going to miss the virtual soundcheck. I don't know what I'm going to do. It's going to be horrible. But lucky for me, the band soundchecked every single day anyway.
Right.
And when they did get up on stage, I could fix all of those things that were wrong really quickly anyway, because it was there in front of me all the time, you know. So the need for virtual soundcheck wasn't quite there in the same way that it is with a digital desk, in that you need to go through layers and layers and layers to rebuild it maybe some days, and you need more time to do it, and it's great. But, you know, in the old days, maybe they didn't need it.
So one thing I wanted to ask you, with obviously the studio that you're in now, I've always kind of, for me personally, I've always wanted to be that guy that could offer everything, in the sense that a band pays me a wage to mix their front of house, but if they want to record it, we can do that. If they want a mix down of that, we can do that. If they want edits for social media, or they want me to be able to edit their tracks on the fly, or, you know, whatever. So for me, it was always kind of, I want to surround myself with as much equipment and as much resources as I can, because obviously the front of house engineer's job, certainly over the last few years, and I think mainly down to the ease and the cost of digital technology, has obviously massively changed. You know, gone are the days where if you want to record a show, you've got a broadcast truck and a bunch of guys turn up and all that. It seems, certainly for me now, that the front of house engineer, you are the recording engineer, you are the mix engineer, you are a hell of a lot of things. So do you find that with the studio, do you find that's an attractive thing to your clients? And do you end up using the studio for a lot of your clients, or do they come into the studio after tours, or is it something that you try and keep separate?
No, I don't. I want it to be a one-stop shop, as like you say, with that. You know, because when you're on the road with a band, I want to be able to go into a radio station with them on an acoustic show and be able to mix it on there, or go into a TV show and do that, or sit in a festival truck and guide the engineers on that. Or, you know, there's many a time I've had to do a rescue mix afterwards on the road on headphones in a dressing room, trying to fix the mix because the broadcast hasn't been right for the band. And so having that skill set, and also be able to go to an acoustic show and be able to know that whatever radio station you're in, you can make sure that the band get a consistent mix themselves. And then you know, the broadcast of that is, because the better those broadcasts are, the better the band are going to be received, and the more gigs they're going to do, which is going to generate more money for me.
Yeah.
So, you know, the more gigs I can do. And so, yeah, I do have a whole package. And with the studio, you know, there's you know, as one example, when I was with Plan B, we were doing the forest tour, and we were out in the countryside in Cheshire, and we were in Staffordshire doing one of the shows. And Ben said, "Oh, I've got to finish my album by next week. Do you know anyone who's got a studio in the area?" And I was like, "Well, funny you should say that. I've got one." And this is at like midnight after the show. We just finished and we were having a beer, and, you know, he's like, "Oh, can we go there now?" I'm like, "What do you mean now?" And he's like, "Yeah, I need to get it done in a week. I just want to get in the studio right now." So I called my engineer up, and there's another story about that. But anyway, I got my engineer to come in at 2:00 in the morning, and we arrived. And then Ben ended up staying here for the next 5 days and doing gigs at the same time. Got his album finished and got it delivered on time.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that was a nice thing to do. And then a couple of other bands I've had in here, like 5 Seconds of Summer, have come in to do acoustic videos and stuff. So we've done a live mix of it and treated it like a live session, and then they've been filmed in the other room. And you know, in fact, the script came in and didn't even know this was my studio, and they came in because they were recording up in Manchester, some TV, The Voice. And so Danny came in and did some stuff here, and that was nice. So yeah, it's nice to have all those opportunities there. But I think that, you know, as a sound engineer, and I'm a gadget freak as well. So I love gadgets, and I want every single gadget that's going. And so having a studio was the ultimate gadget. You know, one of the when I said about going into studios asking for jobs at the beginning, I went into Strawberry Studios in Stockport, and I'd knock on the door, and I'd go back every month, and they wouldn't let me in the door. They wouldn't let me in the door. And one day they let me in the door, and I walked into the control room, and they had all the lights off, and there's the desk on and all the gear on, and it looked like the Starship Enterprise. And I was like, wow, this is it. I've got to do this. I have to do this. And then they threw me out, and then they wouldn't let me back in again. But, so
it is big boys' toys, isn't it?
You know, and and I love all the toys and I love all the gadgets, but I just want to be able to use them to do my job. And you know, it becomes an obsession. So I'm currently sitting here in my studio with 6 mixing desks. I think I've got in here at the moment. You know, like 3 major ones and a couple of smaller ones. So, but you know, and somebody just spoke to me today, and they said, "Oh, we've just been given a mixing desk from a school. You know, they were throwing it out and putting it in a skit. Do you want it?" And it's like, "Yep, I'll have it. Thanks."
It is. I mean, I'd love to play with toy trains and toy airplanes and things like that, but I can't because I'm 34 and people would look at me very weird in the street. So instead, I play with all this gear instead. It's the same thing, but
It's still a big gadget. So.
One thing that I just wanted to just go back to when we were talking about broadcasts, it's an interesting thing. On festival tours and stuff like that, where you're doing a lot of TV things like that. You said you're having to do rescue mixes and things, which we've all been in that position, or we've all had to, run from front of the house and get straight to the broadcast truck and approve it or whatever. So what feeds are you giving? Obviously a lot. Do you find that's something that comes from the artist instruction, or is that comes from you? Certainly from my point of view, I'm working with people where we're giving them a full split, or we're giving them stems, or refusing to give them anything, and they have to have the front of house mix. Or what's your stance on that?
Well, don't get me wrong. There are some broadcast guys who are absolutely brilliant, and some of them I would call friends. Do you know what I mean? Like close friends. And I think they are really, really, really good at their job. There are other engineers, and you're like, yeah, I can't really trust this guy. I don't really know what's going on. I need to we're going to need to do a post mix on this. I love pre-record. Do you know what I mean? The words pre-record. If we're doing a TV or something like that, and we're going to do a pre-record, brilliant, because then I can get involved and get more hands on it. I've been in some TV studios where the mix has been destroyed, whereas soundcheck was brilliant, and then for some reason the show has just all gone to shit. Sorry. But the in terms of what to send them, I've sort of been umming and ahhing about sending stems now to certain festivals, and I do generally set my desks up with stems ready to go. Like on the Louis tour, we've got stems set up there so that we can send them a drum mix and then a band mix and then a vocal mix, and then they can put on maybe some vocal effects or something like that. And I think that's a good way to go if the person hasn't got a clue what they're doing. But also some that can still go wrong though as well. We did, I don't want to name, we did one show in London in one of the big theatres, and we sent them the stems, and we had a person outside mixing those stems who was on our side, and then sending it to a truck outside, and the truck just blended in the crowd mics way too loud and just destroyed everything. So it was like, even though we tried to control it as much as we possibly could, it still went, the last person in the line messed it up.
I had the same thing this summer, and we were out and we're doing something for Italian TV, and it was exactly that. We set up everything, so we had a 3-way split, and then I was also we had then a separate output panel where I think I had 8 stereo stems that, again, as you say, are set up differently in the console. Some are pre, some are post, or whatever, to make sure that you're getting the moves and the things that they need to get. And then also we're giving them a kind of a mastered left and right that they want to use, if they want to use that, or if they want to use as a reference. And we were given, again, we did the stem thing, and we heard it back, and the manager called me and said, "Help, you need to fix this, because this is the worst thing I've ever heard in the history of music." And it was exactly that. They'd just hung one mono mic, not even in stereo, one mono ambient mic, nowhere near where it needed to be. It turns out it was pretty much hung in the roof of the stage, and that was it. And the stems, it was about 90-10, their ambient to our stems, and it was just unrecognisable. And it's like, it begs the question, is that arrogance? Is it laziness? Is it just pure misunderstanding of how it needs to sound? Or, it always intrigues me as to, because, and again, not slagging these people off. As you say, there are some phenomenal guys out there, but it seems to be getting less and less, and it seems to be getting almost a regular thing that, right, gig's done, now we have to go deal with the broadcast mix.
Well, we did a morning show in America, which is one of the biggest TV shows you can do in America. And they do indoor and outdoor gigs. And I went there, and we were doing it. So you basically load in at 5 o'clock in the morning. You've probably done the show, and then you do the show at about 10 o'clock or something like that. And and then you wrap. And then what we did, we then had another gig that evening in New York. So we went to soundcheck, and what they used to do was after the broadcast was there. The producer for the album came in to listen to the broadcast. I was in the broadcast. The guy did it in 5.1. Sounded fine in the studio. It was all really, really good. Then we're doing soundcheck in the afternoon at the gig, and the band come in, and they were like, what was wrong with the mix? Why does it sound so terrible? We're like, what do you mean? Well, they put it online and it's like, it's awful. You know, what's going on? It's not good enough. So I went and had a listen to the mix that's online. And what they'd done was just put the video up with the central speaker of the 5.1 sound as the audio for it on online, not on the TV. On the TV, it went through.
Yeah.
And I went back and I looked through all the other videos of the previous 2 months of all the bands that had been on, and they'd done exactly the same with all of them. And we called them up and we were like, what are you doing? Like this is wrong. You need to fix this. So they did fix it, and they fixed that band's video. And then from then on, all the other videos were fine, but they basically had put and nobody had bothered to check it.
Just bouncing the center feed as the mix.
They just bounced it and sent it up for the center speaker. And that was a horrible day, because we were like, we couldn't work out what had gone wrong. Once they'd resolved it, it was okay, but it was still quite scarring to think that we were sat in that room, it sounded great, and then suddenly that, and that's one of the biggest TV shows in America.
And it's an interesting thing, isn't it? It's a scary thing from a front of house point of view, that it can very much come back to harm you from the artist. And there's always that embarrassing thing of you'll go out and you do a festival and someone will post it on social media and you get tagged, and I just want to let you know that's not my mix. That's nothing to do with me. And but it's obviously there's a lot of bands and artists themselves who don't have technical knowledge of things, and they assume that if they watch that is what you're doing, and you get it can be quite a dangerous thing where you have to you have to kind of douse the fire and explain the kind of the way things happen, and take yourself out of the firing line sometimes.
Yeah, it's hard, but then also sometimes if it does sound amazing, I'm happy to take the. But if it sounds terrible, I'll certainly explain to them how the situation.
Yeah, it sounds great. So that's 100% ambient mics, because that was definitely me.
Yeah, it's definitely me. And I think the Instagram video thing of like bands watching those back can cause a lot of trouble for a lot of people as well. But because of the phone compression. But I'm glad that phones are getting better at picking up the sound now, because if you get it decent, it should usually be.
But it is a thing, isn't it? It is a thing. You get on the bus and that's exactly what they're doing. They're watching about. It's amazing. But yeah, well, sorry. So that was an interesting side note. But we'll talk about gear for a bit, because obviously, as we've said, you're I think we're quite similar, and we're definitely self-confessed gear nuts, sat in our over the top man caves. But the one thing I want to talk to you about, obviously, you've made quite an interesting journey from analog to digital, and now you're very firmly back in analog world. So do you want to kind of talk us through that, and also, as we go, kind of tell us how, if at all, your approach or your mix or even indeed your perception of what you're doing sonically has changed?
Well, obviously I started in analog world because that's all there was. And then when it changed to digital, I was like, I fought it a little bit. When the PM5D came out and having to do that, it was always a bit of a struggle. Once you start to conquer it, and then you get better at it and you start to use it. I mean, the very first time I used a profile, I looked at one in a rehearsal room for about 10 minutes. And then the next time I saw one was on the main stage of Glastonbury with Lily Allen. And we had 48 channels, and I had to I didn't have a file because I'd never seen one before. So I was like, oh, okay. So I think it had presets for kick drum, snare drum, hi-hat. And I said, can you put those in for me, please? And we'll start there. And the system guy was brilliant. And he was really helpful. And he said, there you go. And we got away with it, and it worked, and it was good. And imagine how it would have sounded if I'd had to go on one before. It would have been great. But it was that sort of scary time when digital first came in, and it was really horrible. And so I didn't really embrace it to start off with. And then the more I've done with it, the more I've now got a mix for every desk. And I understand all the major desks. And I think they've got, since the profile, I think all the desks have now got much better, the quality, the sound of them, the Soundcraft, the Midas, the Allen and Heath, the Digicos, you can get a good show. If you can't get a good show out of them, then you can't get a good show. It's like they've got all the tools there. One thing it did teach me, because in analog you're EQing things and compressing things just by turning buttons and just going like, that sounds better. No, it doesn't. Yes, it does. No, it doesn't. Whereas when you've got a screen on the digital, you see this picture and then you can draw the picture and you can see what you're actually doing. And that can be good in one way, but also in another way, it's like, oh my God, like what, it looks terrible. I'm destroying it. How can I, but without, and you're forgetting to listen because you're watching the screen and you're doing it with your eyes. And things like the positions where the EQs were on a profile EQ weren't in the same place that they were on a normal standard EQ on an analog desk, and so you'd have to look to see where it was, and you'd have to hear it to move it. You couldn't just do the same things. You couldn't do it from muscle memory.
So, and things like your EQ windows square instead of rectangular, so your cuts on a profile always looked infinitely more aggressive than something else. And again, it's like that. You just have to think, oh no, actually look away.
So you get the fear just by looking at the picture. But it taught me a lot more about the technical side of it because I'm self-taught. It taught me about the figures and the numbers and the frequencies and that, and so I had to concentrate more on that rather than go like, oh, it sounds like the lower mid knob, that sounds better, but then you go in like, oh no, it's like 250, 160 or whatever, you know, it's like, that's what I need to cut, that's what I need to get rid of. And so I learned a lot more from a digital desk about mixing sound than I did using an analog desk. But when I went back to analog, it was like, oh my God, that's why I got into doing this, because this is so much more fun. This is so much more reactive, and it sounds, there's a depth to it that is missing in digital. Like digital, you can get it to do that and you can get it to do that, but it's very difficult to get it to do that. So whereas analog gives you that immediately, like you just hear the kick drum and you're suddenly like, oh, that's what I've been missing all these years, you know. And as I say, the new desks are definitely getting there with that. You know, like
and what before you moved back to where you are now, what was your console of choice? What were you touring?
Digitally, all sorts really. I preferred the Soundcrafts. I like the VI 7000. I liked the VI 6 and the 4s. I was touring those when I had the opportunity to do that. A lot of people when Digicos came out were looking at me as if I was like really uncool because why are you not using a Digico? You know, but I've done loads of touring on the SD12 recently and had that, and that's a really nice small compact console that's got everything that I need in it. I don't need a 7 because I don't know, I can do everything on a 12. It's like a baby 7 to me.
Yeah.
And I didn't really enjoy that like the earlier Digico models as much, you know, to use, because I love the 2-screen thing, love them both there and the split stuff. And then when I go back onto an SD10 now, I basically treat it like an SD12 and just use 2 blocks of it and forget about the extra block on the end.
An interesting thing with digital, obviously, that never came into play with analog was availability, because obviously now you are relying on the show file. How much does that affect your decision between consoles as opposed to, you know, what you can get out of it sonically? You know, thinking, well, actually, I can get a Digico everywhere. I can get this. I might not be able to in this continent. I might not be able to get a Soundcraft or whatever. You know, what's the kind of trade-off in that for you?
No, I think that's a very important factor in it, and that actually now dominates the decision. Like on the last tour, on the Louis tour, we took an SD12 because the production manager wanted me to, because of all the places that we were going, that was going to be the most consistently, the most likely desk that we were going to get. So we also got an S6L into rehearsal so I could build a file for that. So I had the 2 desks going at the same time. But essentially that decision of what we took on that tour was done because of availability. And it's like, you know, I'd love to use the SSL on the tour. I've never toured that. That's the only desk, I think, of all the digital desks that I've never actually done a tour on. I've done one-offs, and I'd really like to take that on tour, but there are certain territories where there would be concern about getting one, you know. But I mean, my first choice, I've now just bought this Heritage, you know, this 3K thing, and that I cannot wait to take that on tour with me, you know. But at the same
sticking on where we are,
you know,
how does that work then? Is this an argument that you have to have with production managers? Because obviously, as we all know, you know, front of house real estate now is at a premium, that people now know, you know, we're not touring with an XL4, we're touring with an SD12, therefore I can sell 30 tickets more. The production manager knows there's more space and more weight available in the truck. How much of an argument is it to get your current setup onto tours now?
Well, that's why I bought this split Heritage, because it's you know, the 24 channel one. So I'm looking at there, it's sat right there. The 24 channels one is smaller than an SD7, and then it's a 16 channel sidecar that I can stick on top of a couple of racks. But it is an argument you have to have, and it is obviously a financial reality that bands don't, well, not bands, but production managers don't want to have such a big console in the truck, and also for your front of house space. But if you can work out a way of making it smaller, it's you're there. It's good. I mean, we took an XL3 out last year, which I bought, and one of the bands was kind enough to ask me to take it. They wanted me to take it, and I found that I'd turn up with my racks and the XL3, and we'd do some main stages of festivals, and there'd be another rack there with an SD7 and loads of outboard racks, and they were taking up a bigger footprint than me.
Yeah.
I've even been we were in a venue somewhere, and there was a Pro 2 for the support band, and with the Pro 2 and all the control racks, that took up the same space as my XL3 with my 2 racks. So there is a way of making it work, and every time I've taken it out and done it, all of the things that people have said, you can't do it because of this, you can't do it because of that, were all blown away in a puff of smoke. It's just having the courage to do it and say, this is what I want to do. And then once you do it, people realize, that the last time I took a Heritage out, everybody was like, wow, this was a good idea, but only afterwards, not before.
Yeah. And is it something that the artists get involved with? Are they aware of it more, or is it more between you and the production manager?
No, I'd always want to, I mean, on the last tour I did last year, which was the same band that we'd done an arena tour with the Heritage. We went back to theatres, and then I wanted to then go back and do the analog stuff again, but because it was a new album and the artist was like, well, I want it to sound exactly like the album, which is you get a lot these days, and he wanted to do scenes, and he wanted to make sure that every song was different. So the production manager said, well, what are we going to do about this? And I said, well, if he wants scenes, then let's just do the digital. I don't mind. It's like, I'd much rather do analog, but I'd much rather keep my job. So we then made the decision, because the artist wanted to do scenes, and then we used the SD12, and I had that. And in the end, by the time we'd finished rehearsals, the only thing I was doing with my scenes was changing my reverbs and my delay time. And so I could have taken it out in the end anyway, because he was like happy with the sound that I'd got, and I managed to do it without doing scenes, because I'm not a scenes guy.
So taking that same artist, and then you've got the analog show and you've got the digital show. Is to you sonically, is it changing much between that? Are you still going for the same sound, or do you have an analog show in your head and a digital show in your head? How are you approaching that with the two different technologies?
The only way that I can get to use a different digital desk all the time and an analog desk, and whatever it is I'm given, is to have the same sound at the end of it. I'm aiming for the same thing. If I use a digital desk or an analog desk, I don't go like, oh, I've got an analog desk, I'm going to mix it this way. I've got a digital desk, I'm going to mix it this way. I have the concept of what the final mix should be like, which is exciting and dynamic and punchy. And
so does that restrict what you use on a digital console, or do you find you have to apply more processing on a digital side to get your, to match the Heritage mix, for example?
I think you have to do more on a digital desk to make it sound as good as an analog desk, yeah, for sure. But I think you can also go too far. You can over process, you can put too many plugins on something and just do what you need to get it sounding great. I don't consider myself a producer when I'm mixing a live sound. If I'm in the studio, I consider myself a producer. Yeah. But if I'm doing a live mix, I'm recreating what the band are doing. So I don't want to add extra things into their mix that are not, because it's still creative, but I don't want to force things into it that if some other engineer came in, it would completely disappear. Do you know what I mean? Because
you've got to put your spin on it and your personality, but you still have to remain honest and respectful to what they've, the product that they've done.
Yeah, my main rule is if there's somebody on stage playing something, you should be able to hear it. Otherwise, there's no point in them playing it. So if you're looking at the stage and you can't hear what the keyboard's playing, or you can't hear what the bass player's playing, then the mix is wrong. And that's a different approach in live. So in the studio, you can do stuff that's really quiet, and you can hide it, and you can bury it and things. But I think that if you work with a great musical director, or a band that have got their arrangements perfectly right, you just got to make sure they're heard, and then it'll work. Whereas in the studio, yes, there are little twiddly little bits you can do, that little subtle things that can be hidden, that are only there on the 10th listen, you know. But in a live situation, it's broad brushstrokes rather than fine tuning, you know, I think.
Yeah, amazing. Well, we won't talk much more about the gear, because hopefully I'm going to twist your arm into doing as a little video of your analog setup, because I think it'd be an interesting thing to see. So we'll finish up with just 2 questions. One, I want to know who your biggest inspiration or influence through all of this is, be it musically or be it technically, or, you know, someone that's you find has had a profound effect on your career.
That's a very, very difficult question. But in terms of musically, it's got to be Radiohead. What they do is they're my inspiration, and they are my level, my bar that I try to, that I use to match levels to. John Leckie's production on the Bends, like the Bends is one of my favorite albums. So from a studio point of view, I loved that album, and I love his production, which now, I wouldn't say it's dated at all, but that for many, many years inspired me, and that teaches me in the studio. But then Radiohead as a sound, and their, the whole ethos behind them, and their attitude towards making music about it. To me, it seems to be about the music, and it's not about ego. And I think when it becomes about ego, the music becomes shit and disappears. You know, so they're probably the biggest inspiration on my musical life, for sure.
And you probably potentially almost just answered my next question, which is the one piece of advice that you could give to everyone listening that you think could benefit them.
I think there's 2 important things. Sorry, I know it's only one, but the first one is make sure you just be nice to everybody that you meet and you work with, and go in there with the attitude that everyone's going to be all right, it's going to be great, and be nice, because you never know when you're going to meet that person. And then from a sound point of view, it's just use your ears. Don't use your eyes. Use your ears.
Yeah.
That's about, as I can't make it.
No, it's great. Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much, my friend. And as I say, hopefully all being well, I'm going to twist your arm into doing as a little gear video that we can put out after this. So, but thank you very much, my friend. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and stay safe.
And you stay safe too.
Brilliant. Cheers, mate. Thank you. Thanks so much, John. Really enjoyed that, and I hope you guys can take something away from that as well. As always, if you can like and subscribe, that would be wonderful. Our guest next week is Martin Walker, who has a really eclectic client list ranging from Taylor Swift to Iron Maiden. Really great chat with Martin about all kinds of things, and really hope you can tune in for that. So as ever, thanks ever so much, and we'll see you next time.